Hi everybody, welcome to Mike's Mopar Garage. Today we're in the shop working on my personal car, a 1968 Dodge Charger RT. It's a car that I restored back in 2001 and it's starting to show its age a little bit. And the area we're going to be talking about today is the underdash wiring harness. An often problem with a lot of cars is that the wiring harnesses. When I restored this car back in 2001, the choices of replacing the harnesses were pretty limited. I chose to go through my original harness and look and make sure it was in good shape and replace any areas that were questionable, and I reinstalled it, and that was in 2001. Here we are in 2019, and we had a problem. I was driving a car and smelt wiring burning. I lifted up the hood and the bulkhead connector was on fire. So luckily I was drinking a glass of iced tea at the time. I was able to put the fire out with a glass of iced tea, believe it or not. It was just luck that I had that with me. And the car was still running. So I was able to drive it home and literally got it in my driveway before the car shut down. So I decided to go ahead and replace everything. And while I was had the dash out replacing the harness, going to do a bunch of other upgrades, which are going to be other videos that I'll bring to you as well. But I've already pulled the dash out and I've already actually replaced the harness, and I did this prior to wanting to video document it. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and show you what I did, give you some tips on what I did as far as replacing it and some other things, and maybe this is going to help you with your project. So let's take a look. I wanted to take the opportunity to show you my car. Again, this is a 68 Charger RT that I restored in 01. A friend of mine, Richard Romanelli, and he's right here in Loxahatchee, Florida, and he did the body and paint on it. Restifications Unlimited here in Loxahatchee. And I have to tell you, the description of laser straight does not describe this car good enough. It's beyond laser straight. It's immaculate when I did this car, and it's dirty right now, so you can see the dirt in it. Just because it's sitting in my shop while I'm working on it. But this car was painted 19 years ago. This car was painted in 2000, and then I started the rest of the restoration in 2001. This car still turns head. When I wash it and throw a coat of wax on it, this car is stunning. The red paint job on it is unbelievable. And I'm not saying that just because it's my car, but I get to see a lot of cars at car shows, and this holds up quite well. Show you the motor a little bit. It's a 440, obviously. It's bored 30 over. It's got a comp cam in it, 484 lift. It's not too bad. It's got a set of Stealth 448 aluminum heads on it, and I painted them to make them look a little stealthier. And that's actually an aluminum Wyand aluminum intake. That's an old style Wyand that mimics the cast iron intake, and it flows a little better than the cast iron. And my goal here was to try to stay somewhat stock looking, and I understand that's a kind of a very vague term, but I wanted to stay as period correct but have drivability as possible, even staying with the exhaust manifolds. I don't know how many of you have put headers on these cars, but the first time you have to change a starter on the side of the road, which I did last year driving the Daytona for the Turkey Rod Run, you're going to appreciate not having headers on that car. And for a street car, the amount of power you're going to gain versus the ease of working on it, in my opinion, is just not worth it. But that's it, and this thing runs like a scalded cat. I'm very, very happy with the way it runs. I built the motor myself, nothing exotic. I do have comp adjustable roller rockers on top of it as well, in these Stealth 440 heads, and it seems to work pretty well. It's a good combination, and many of you will probably, in case you haven't noticed, and it takes a really good Mopar to really determine this, but this is an AC car. You notice the holes and everything for the AC, which we will be installing AC in this car in a later video. But many of you will look and notice, hey, that's not an AC radiator. That's a 22-inch radiator. AC cars come with a 26-inch radiator, and you're absolutely correct. Reason is this is not an original AC car. When I restored this car in '01, Richard Romanelli, being the phenomenal body guy that he is, installed a factory AC firewall in this car. And that's actually cut out of an original car that he installed. And I have to tell you, for a living, my profession is I'm a welding inspector. I travel around the world doing inspections in nuclear power plants and oil refineries. And as a welding inspector, I could not find where he welded it. It was that good. But this is a Griffin Muscle Car Series aluminum radiator. And normally on a 22-inch radiator, the upper hose should connect here. But knowing I was going to have AC installed, I had to move it to install it here to allow for the belts to come through like a standard 26-inch radiator. And I have to tell you, this 22-inch radiator cools phenomenally. In the wintertime here in Florida, which, you know, is kind of a joke at wintertime, but it does get down fairly cool at night sometimes in the 40s. I've been out cruising in the 40s and 30s. And even though that's pretty cold for Florida standards, maybe not for the rest of the country, but for Florida standards it's pretty cold. And when I'm running down the highway, sometimes I have to put a piece of cardboard in front of the radiator to block off a little bit, restrict airflow, to get some temperature in the motor. It cools that good. And here in the heat of summer, when it gets quite hot, running down the highway, it stays on 180, and in traffic it may come up to 190 to 200, but it cools quite well. And I'm anticipating that when I get AC in this car, I may have to add maybe an electric fan helper on it. And as you notice, I do not have a fan clutch. I got a standard fan in there, but I do have a shroud. And so I'm thinking about changing that out and going to a fan clutch and possibly adding a electric fan if I have to. That's going to be kind of the last resort. I'll maybe put an electric fan up front with a condenser where the front of the radiator would be. But this is my car. This is my baby. I've had this car now for about 24 years, and it's going to stay in the family. It's already in the will. I have a daughter who is way into cars, an older daughter, and it's going to be a fight between her and my grandson, I think, between who gets the car when Grandpa kicks the bucket. But hopefully that's not going to be anytime soon. But I love this car. At any given weekend, I'll put several hundred miles on this car. And 2 years ago at Daytona for the Turkey Rod Run, over a 4-day period, I put 900 miles on this car. And the only thing that happened to me is I had a starter go out and I had to change it in the parking lot. And as luck have it, the starter went out in the parking lot of a gas station right next to an O'Reilly's Auto Parts. So I was able to get it changed and back on the road in 45 minutes. That would not have happened if I had headers on this car. So please keep that in mind. You guys wanting to put headers on your street cars, hey, I'm all for headers too, but if you're just going to be driving this thing and not racing it and want to get, extract every last bit of horsepower out of these things, I would think twice about putting headers on it. I had a friend of mine suggest it to me because he has 3 cars. He has 2 Chargers and a Coronet RT, and I was going to put headers, and he suggested not and told me why, and that was the best advice I ever took. So if I can pass any of that advice on, that would be my advice. No headers unless you absolutely really gotta have them. So that's my car. So here we are in the shop. I got the dash pulled out and it's laying on the bench. And first thing I did is I ordered a new harness from Classic Industries. These guys have a lot of good parts. Many of you I know out there use them, and I do as well for various parts. So I ordered a Classic Industry dash harness with the TAC wiring and the AC wiring. So once I got that in and I started removing the old dash, it's just pretty much a plug and play. So what I did is I took the old dash wiring and made notes, put little pieces of tape around each connector to kind of remind me what it was. And then when I put the new harness, it went right back in pretty smoothly. Like I said, it was pretty much a plug and play. Not much issues. There were a few minor connection issues, which I'm going to show you what I did. But for the most part, the color of the wiring, the quality of the wiring from Classic Industries, I was pretty impressed. I know there's a couple other companies out there that make them. This is just a route that I took, and it works quite well, so I'm pretty happy with it. So let's take a look at the dash and show you what I did. So you'll notice that the harness, the back of the gauge cluster, the harness is installed already. And one of the areas that I had problems with was with these connectors right here. The connectors that goes in for the bulbs. The plug itself, this part right here, does not grip the socket very well. So that's one problem I had. So that you just got to make sure that you get it seated properly and that it goes in a little bit better. On this one here, you'll notice that's an old style plug, and it's actually from my original harness. And you'll also notice it comes down and I got a splice right here. And that's because the original wire with the original plug, it was actually too short. So when I went to plug it in, it was so tight it kept popping back off. So what I decided to do is use the one from the original harness, spliced it in, heat shrinked it. I soldered the connection and heat shrink it, and now the original plug fits much better, and it's much tighter in that hole, so it's not going to come out when I'm after installing it. But if you notice, everything else lined up pretty well. I zip tied it and try to run it in all the original bracketry, and I zip tied everything to hold it up in place to make it a little neater. I actually even made some labels for later on, so that after I get it back into the car, I will have some notes on where some of this stuff specifically goes. I got some speaker wires going in here. This dash actually came out of a 69 Roadrunner, and it had the in-dash speakers, which I liked. So when I restored this car in 01, I swapped the dash frame out and used this one instead. I got an aftermarket radio. You'll see, I'll show you from the front view here in a minute. And I got all the wiring just about ran properly. The original fuse box, and you'll see where I got the other connections coming in, and everything connected and everything routed properly so that it's up out of the way. I even took some of the wiring, and there was no other way to hold it in place, so I just put some tape on it to hold it up in place. And then I routed it over here, and again I zip tied it, holding everything in place so that it's a little neater. Once I get it ready to go into the dash, I will take these for the vents, and I'll actually slide the hose over it, and I'll use some aluminum duct tape and hold it in place so it holds it nice and firm, and it won't come off. Because if you've ever tried to get these on while the dash is installed in the car, you got to be a contortionist and have a lot of patience, which I am neither. So therefore I chose to go ahead and do it that way. One of the recommendations I have is on various connections, such as this right here, for the main harness itself. As you'll notice, you'll see some grease in there, and that's dielectric grease. I suggest you put dielectric grease on all your connections. And what the dielectric grease will do is prevent any corrosion in the future. It makes it easier to get on and off, and it will prevent that corrosion in the future. It's just a really good practice on any of these electrical connections that you have down in here for your switches, is to go ahead and put some dielectric grease on there before you install it. It'll save you problems down the road. One of the areas you want to really look at is your circuit board. This circuit board is in pretty good shape. You'll notice right there, there's actually a solder repair, and that's been there forever since I've owned the car. Previous owner did that. I've checked it out many times, looked at it, and it's in good shape, so I don't see any foreseeable reason to change that. So I didn't. The voltage limiter I changed out, that's a new one, and verified it that the proper voltage is coming out of it. Got a new speaker. These little speakers right here, those are Those are Polk Audios. Now the problem with them is that they cannot take a lot of amperage. Wattage. So you either gotta compensate for that by not putting very much to it, or they make actually circuit like a resistor that can go in line to reduce the amount of wattage going to that speaker so you don't blow them. So if you really want to pump the bass to the back, or maybe run in subwoofers and things of that nature, you can adjust that. But this is it. The wiring harness is pretty straightforward, so if you ever never done one before, don't be intimidated by it. It's pretty easy. Just take your time, pay attention to the connections, and use dielectric grease. Zip tie stuff up to take the strain relief off of things, and you should be in good shape. So I was talking earlier about the dielectric grease. So this is the dielectric grease. I got this at Home Depot, actually. I'm not too thrilled about the spray, because sometimes it's a little hard to control, and it wants to come out too fast. They make it in tubes, so if you can get in tube, I'd suggest that's what I would suggest you use. But if this is the only choice, by all means use it, because any dielectric grease is better than none. So any electrical contact, I would highly suggest that's what you use. You're gonna be thankful later on when you have less corrosion, and it's easier to get the plugs in and out. So it's a big plus. So this is under the hood, and as you'll notice, I got new wiring harnesses here. This is for the forward light harness. That's the engine harness, and then the third one will come from the wiper motor over here, and the bulkhead connector right here. And again, when I'm installing these, I'm going to put some dielectric grease on the connectors right there, and after installation it should prevent any more corrosion, because I believe that's where the fire started. I believe that the old connections just corroded, and then it had a short and then caused a fire. There was a little bit of flame marks right here on the car itself. One of the things I wanted to do is give a little shout out to Haggerty Insurance. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, other than the fact that I use them and send them a check once a year for my car. But we all have insurance for just in case. And in this particular case, that's exactly what happened. When I had the fire and got it home, I was wondering, what is my first step? What am I going to do? So I called Haggerty Insurance and told them exactly what happened, that I was driving it, it caught on fire, I put it out with iced tea, got it home, and so forth. They sent an adjuster out the very next day. The gentleman looked at it, and 2 days later I had a check for $3,500 to pay for a new harness and the other components that I need to replace, like the forward light harness, the rebuild of the wiper motor, because since it burned all the wiring in it, the wiper motor had to be replaced anyway. So it just so happens, since it wasn't working, it worked out quite well. But they didn't hesitate, so I have to give a big shout out to Haggerty Insurance. We pay these premiums for these cars. They're meant to be driven, and you need to drive them with a little bit of confidence to know that if something happens to these cars, that you're going to get taken care of. And this is a particular case that I have to say, it was seamless. And I know for a fact, and I know from experience, in 1989, 1990, I was getting out of the Air Force, moving to Florida where I live now. And I had a 69 Roadrunner. I had bought it a couple years prior, and I was working on it, and it was not registered, and that was my problem. It was not registered, and therefore it did not have good insurance on it. I just had it registered with my insurance company, told them what it was, but it was not plated on a road. And while I was leaving the base, moving to Florida, a lady broadsided me with a Bronco, T-boned the car on the trailer. She totaled the car and the trailer out in one hit. I was devastated, because I'd worked part-time for years to buy that car, and it was a dream car of mine to get, and then just in an instant it was gone. So here I got a 69 Roadrunner on a trailer totaled. My compensation for that was $1,000. I got $1,000 for a totaled 69 Roadrunner. They let me keep the car, but Back in the days, back in 1990, we didn't have the sheet metal companies like AMD and so forth that was producing quality sheet metal parts. So what I ended up doing is bringing it to Florida, what was left of it, and parting it out and selling it. And as a matter of fact, part of that car lives on with the Charger. The rear end, the 489 pumpkin third member is in this car because it was a posi, or I should say a shear grip, 355 shear grip, and in the Roadrunner, and the Charger had a 323 open, so I just swapped it out. And so that part of that car lives on, but it was just proof that you got to have the right insurance. So again, a shout out to Haggerty, and I much appreciated their response and their quick action on this, so it helped out a lot. Well, that's it. Just a quick overview of replacing that dash wiring harness. I apologize for not having more footage at the very beginning, but it's pretty straightforward. Most of you have already done a lot of this work yourself. So just remove the windshield, and then you remove the clips. The screws come out the tops. You take a few screws and the bolts on the side, and literally it'll fall in your lap. So once you get it out, just take your time. Look at your old harness and match up your new harness. Take a look at it, make sure all your connections are there, make sure all the wires are there, and go ahead and replace it. And then putting the dash back in the car is really not a big deal. You're going to have probably a partner to help you lift it up and get it in there. But it's not that big of a deal. It's just pain in the rear getting everything out because you're going to take the windshield out and stuff like that, and a little time consuming. But on a skill level, it's actually pretty easy, so it's not too bad. So that's it. So I appreciate it very much. And if you like this video, please subscribe and hit like button, and hit the little bell also to let you know when a new video pops up. And we're going to bring you some other videos with the further work on my car. So thanks a lot. See you later.